Good morning, everyone. My name is Jeffrey Blair, and I'm with the Greater Houston Partnership. And today you have joined the webinar for opportunities in carbon capture, use, and storage between Houston and the Netherlands. We have a very good group of speakers together today, experts in their field from both sides of the Atlantic. And to get us started off, I'm going to ask the Consul General of the Netherlands in Miami, Ruth Emmerich, to get us started with her opening comments and welcome. So take it away, Consul General.
Good morning. Thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you very much. Good morning, Texas, and good afternoon to the Netherlands. And especially a warm welcome to our panelists from both the Netherlands and the US. It's an honor to be joined by such a distinguished set of experts and decision makers in the energy field. Our mission at the Consulate General of the Netherlands is to connect the Netherlands and Houston, to bring public and private organizations together, and to build partnerships that work. And that is exactly what we're here for today. Together with our colleagues at the Netherlands Business Support Office in Houston and the Greater Houston Partnership, we have organized the event today to connect companies and governments in the Netherlands and Texas and exchange experiences and best practices. Because only by working together can we move the energy transition forward. Partnerships between the Netherlands and Texas can make a difference, especially in the energy transition. Imagine what could happen if we combine the efforts of Houston, the energy capital of the world, and the Netherlands, an energy hub and gateway to the European continent. Carbon capture and storage is a key component of the energy transition and an area in which we are natural partners. In the Netherlands, CCS is an essential step in achieving the targets in the Dutch Climate Agreement. Our country is developing major projects to store CO2 in empty gas fields beneath the North Sea. The largest, Porthos, is expected to store 2.5 million tons of CO2 annually from industrial operations in the Port of Rotterdam area. As you know, similar plans are being contemplated for the Houston port area. So just last month, 11 companies announced that they're collaborating on what has the potential to become the world's largest carbon capture and storage hub. These projects can play a major role in reducing carbon emissions, but they can also spur innovation and create business opportunities on both sides of the Atlantic. Our panelists today will elaborate on the public-private partnerships that these initiatives are built on and highlight some of the economic incentives involved. The energy transition requires a concerted effort from governments, communities, and businesses. And with today's event, we aim to strengthen those relationships. I am convinced that we will identify many opportunities to work together, as the foundation for cooperation between the Netherlands and Texas is very strong. We are proud to be the largest European export destination for goods from Texas. Our trade and investment ties support an estimated 80,000 jobs in the Lone Star State. On the energy transition especially, cooperation between the Netherlands and Houston is growing. Last fall, we organized a digital trade mission on Energy 2.0, together with the NBSO, the Greater Houston Partnership, and Rotterdam partners. Today's event builds on that mission and on the MOU that was signed between the Greater Houston Partnership and Rotterdam partners on that occasion. Another MOU that provides a platform for energy cooperation is between our Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate and the US Department of Energy in the field of hydrogen. This summer, the Netherlands had the opportunity to showcase our approach to the energy transition during a dedicated session at the Offshore Technology Conference. After today, our consulate and the NBSO will continue to connect our Dutch and Texan partners. We will be planning future events on the energy transition together with the Greater Houston Partnership. We will also make sure to follow up on connections made today, and we are here for you to help you pursue economic opportunities on both sides of the Atlantic. I truly look forward to the discussion and hope it will inspire you to connect. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Consul General. So, ladies and gentlemen, now my turn to welcome everyone. Once again, my name is Jeffrey Blair, the Greater Houston Partnership, and I have the pleasure of being the Director for Europe, Middle East, and Africa, which means I'm the one that has the most connection and activities with the Netherlands during my day-to-day job. And I'm thrilled to partner with our colleagues from the Netherlands Business Support Office here in Houston, the consulate in Miami with the Consul General, and with Luke, the Deputy Consul and their energy expert, as well as the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Infrastructure in The Hague. Everyone who worked very hard in getting this excellent program together. Some of you may notice from the original program that I'm not Jose Besario. That is because Jose has a much more pleasant task this morning. His wife and he are welcoming a new baby into the world today. So he has his mission and we have ours. So I want to very briefly go over the agenda. As you'll see, it's a very tight program. There's going to be a lot of information coming your way. I will announce but they will do their own self-introductions. And then at the end of the first panel will be a Q&A session. Please note, participants, at the bottom of your screen where you have the two icons, one for Q&A and one for chat. If you wish to ask a question of a panelist or the panel as a whole, please put it in the Q&A, right? Those will also be accessible to us after the program. So if we don't get to your question then, we will get to it in the follow-up actions afterwards. If you put it in the chat, it will not be captured after the event. Okay, and then after the first panel, then we'll shift to the next panel that Luke will moderate, and then there will be another Q&A session at the end. And remember, put your questions in the Q&A if you want to have them get them to where they need to go, and then we'll have closing remarks at the end. So, looking at the time, we're right on time here. So I will start the first panel on the state of play in carbon capture, use and storage, and we're going to start out with Mr. Ed Graham from ExxonMobil. Take it away, Graham.
Okay, welcome everyone. It's really an honor to be here today. ExxonMobil has a long history and presence in both the Netherlands and Houston, and it's a real privilege to be able to share a few thoughts today. Just a little bit briefly on myself. Back this past February, ExxonMobil formed a new company called the Low Carbon Solutions, and I joined that group as our Vice President of Ventures this past June. I'm returning from being overseas as the country manager in Malaysia. I'm excited to be in this new role. Almost 15 years ago, I was actually the project manager for one of the larger carbon CCS projects that exist in the world today out in Wyoming. And so earlier in my career, I had some exposure to this, and it's really exciting to be back in this space. The title of this discussion, State of Play, I think is really appropriate. CCS has been a little bit on the sidelines, on the bench, so to speak, if this were a game, over the last couple decades, playing just a little bit at time, and it's starting to now move out and actually be a key player on the field. There's some real momentum beginning to occur around the globe. Dozens of different initiatives are taking off. These are big projects though, and they have a long time horizon for implementation. But a really exciting time to be discussing this today. And I think that's driven, maybe most importantly, by a growing awareness and acceptance that CCS is really important for us to be able as a society to move forward with our carbon greenhouse gas abatement objectives and still be able to enjoy the benefits of some of the larger industrial sectors in particular that we rely on, like cement, steel, power as well. I think there's an awareness that this is complementary to renewables and not in conflict with. Go to my next chart, if you could. I have just a few charts here then just to highlight a few key points. I'm not going to belabor it, but this one I thought was important. As I said, there's growing momentum, but the economics are still challenged on this. And so that's part of, we're out on the field, but the momentum is building, but there's still more to come. There is currently are incentives out there, mostly government driven, that are helping to fund some of these initiatives. What's really interesting though, is there's some momentum and conversation around how do we essentially attribute some of this sequestration to products that would be able to be sold at a premium because of them being a lower carbon intensity. And that could help, I think, to ultimately drive the economics and drive forward all of these initiatives around the globe. So that's an exciting emerging opportunity that's being discussed. There's still a lot of uncertainty with that though as well, which is leaving some hesitancy in some cases. But the other part I wanted to highlight here is in CCS. When you dig and look under the hood a bit, what you find is that 70 to 80% of the costs are in the carbon capture, not in the storage. And the different sectors and uses where the carbon has to be captured, there are different costs. And the bottom chart there on the left shows that in the area of processing, natural gas, some cases has CO2, separating that CO2, or separating the CO2 from the hydrogen plants, which is essentially, if you capture that, it's called blue hydrogen. Those are at lower cost than some of the more complex carbon capture challenges around some of the other facilities. And so what you'll see, and I'll highlight this on my last chart, this is the area where the work is kicking off more quickly in the area of capturing high concentration CO2 streams and hydrogen facilities, which are not necessarily used for fuel today, which is a lot of the conversation externally, but is used for processing in refineries and chemical plants for the most part, as well as for ammonia. Next chart. The other challenge that we're facing right now is there's still a pretty uncertain regulatory environment around the globe. And the chart on the left is just a third-party assessment of the situation with respect to the maturity of the regulations. And you can see it's quite varied around the globe, shown by the color, as well as in many areas in the gray where there's little to nothing today around regulations. And so there's a ton of work left to be done. And this is really a whole of government need here around not just the regulations associated with incentives, but also regulations for managing the injection, for measuring and properly accounting for that, as well as for ensuring that the ownership and access to the pore space in the ground is available. And then the appropriate measures are in place to monitor and manage that long term, and ultimately to how to deal with long-term risk exposures, which companies have to think about and governments need to work with them to find reasonable solutions. And so there's a ton of work needed around both the investment side and the regulations. And most importantly, and probably should have been at the top, is the community support. This isn't going to happen without that. And it's both local support as well as support by taxpayers to help as we begin to, as a society, put a cost to carbon. And how do we effectively manage that cost, either through the customer paying higher prices, companies addressing it, or taxpayer support in the near term as we build out a new industry. Last chart, just to highlight, go to the next chart, please. I just wanted to highlight just a few points here. Really exciting for the Netherlands and for Houston. Both are really on the leading edges in this space in CCS. The Porthos hub that's soon to be reaching final investment decision is a really exciting and really pushing the envelope out in Europe with one of the first initiatives. ExxonMobil is really proud to be a part of that effort. As Consul General said, there's about 2.5 million tons per annum that will be going offshore there. On the Houston side, we're not quite as far along, and what was announced recently is really a shared vision by industry that we've got to work together to develop a plan. And so this is just a concept here, a drawing on the right, but there's a prolific amount of space underground for storage in the Houston area, Gulf Coast region. And so we can anticipate probably there'll be multiple hubs over time that are going to be developed to capture and then ultimately store safely offshore. There's a ton of space onshore as well, and I would expect there'll be some sequestration ultimately onshore as well. But offshore, tremendous amount of acreage ultimately that we'll be able to utilize to help decarbonize the industrial sectors in the Houston area. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Ed. That was very informative and a great way to kick off this panel. So we're going to go to the next panelist now, who is Lee Stockwell from Shell. Take it away, Lee.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, Lee Stockwell, I'm the general manager for CCS and Shell for the Americas. I've actually been asked here today to speak more on the Dutch portfolio, including Porthos, so I'll give a little bit more detail than Ed did on that. But I specifically look after our onshore right now portfolio in the Americas, hopefully moving to offshore as Ed mentioned. Next slide for me, please. This is a standard boilerplate that says, please don't purchase Shell stock based on anything I say today. It comes kind of standard with our external presentations. There won't be a quiz on it, but did want it to flash up just for a moment. Let's go to the next slide, please. So at a very high level, Shell is committed to the energy transition, and we've been very forward-facing in that regard. Ultimately, what we want to be able to do is decarbonize our own footprint with the sites that we manufacture products and produce our energy products, as well as look to the industry and help to decarbonize the industry through their journey as well. And that's in a full suite of offerings, from some of the biofuels products to energy in terms of green electrons. Hydrogen, as Ed mentioned, is also a key in the energy transition, as well as CCS, which we see as an underpinning of much of what we want to do in a decarbonization space. Our aim, of course, is net zero by 2050, with steps along the way that continue to increase the slope in terms of our decarbonization between now and then. Go ahead for the next one, please. We've got a lot of different projects going on across the globe, and you can see some of them listed here in several different countries. There's a lot more work going on in other countries that aren't listed on here, but as of yet haven't been announced externally. Our aim, of course, is to enable a lot of the different decarbonization components along the way. So not just our own emissions, but how do we also make certain that the fuels of the future are lower carbon? How do we make certain that we're shifting our energy sources to things that are more responsible, including renewables, but also in the hydrogen space? And how do we make certain that we're working with various sectors that would be hard to abate to help them move their journey along? And that's really the space where we're spending a lot of time on top of developing technology that can help us get from point A to point B, such as direct air capture. You know, our goal here internally in Shell is to get to 25 million tons per year sequestered by CCS, but we see that growing significantly as the industry grows and we get more and more mature with both policies and with the different sectors understanding a bit more and the technology evolving. Let's go to the next one. So I'll spend a few minutes just discussing the environment for our Netherlands projects. Ultimately, we are working in a couple of different spaces, but maybe to start, the Netherlands has been extremely proactive in their climate targets. Their reduction right now looks like approximately 14 million tons per annum reduction by 2035. If you add Northwestern Europe, there's another 100 million tons per year in targets between Belgium, Northern France, and Western Germany. So there's a significant pull for how do we decarbonize in that? And with that, a necessity to create these major projects that will enable the ability for the area in Northwestern Europe to really move towards that decarbonization. There's also been a lot of work done to understand what the capacity is. And Ed mentioned Porthos and the use of some of the reservoirs there. We're also looking at the Dutch sector of the North Sea and a couple of other places. And the study done by EBN and Gas Uni said there's on the order of 1.6 billion tons per year of capacity just in depleted gas reservoirs offshore. So significant opportunity set to merge, the aims that we have as a society with the ability to store and permanently sequester some of those volumes. I think in addition, recognizing that CCS is imperative to achieving those goals, the Netherlands also leading in policy to help make CCS attractive for the industrial sectors. Both the SDE++ subsidy on top of subsidies like the EU Innovation Fund, mixed with the tax levy associated with carbon that's in play, both of those all of those will enable an acceleration through the journey for these types of projects, creating the environment that will make CCS a leading candidate for the decarbonization and reasons why you're seeing so much work happen on that front. If I go into a little detail about the projects, and actually there's three, there's only two listed here, but the Three Musketeers projects of Porthos, Aramis, and Athos are all a part of this larger conglomerate of moving the industries towards decarbonization, leveraging the offshore environment to do so. Porthos is a partnership between EBN, Gas Uni, and the Port of Rotterdam. And the intention is over time, it'll store about 37.5 million tons of CO2 in the reservoirs that Ed showed a picture of earlier. And the planned startup of that's about 2024. And it starts with 4 major industrial emitters. And again, Ed's graphic was perfect to show that. So thanks, Ed. The emitters CO2 will be transported through the Port of Rotterdam through an onshore backbone of pipeline. Right now, it's intended to be oversized in capacity so that we can leverage it for future transport of more CO2 towards our offshore reservoirs. The Aramis project is a cooperation between Gas Uni and EBN, but also Shell and Total, leveraging our offshore portfolio as well as the expertise that we have in CCS to utilize those nearby depleted gas fields in the Dutch North Sea to establish that CCS infrastructure targeting more of the hard to abate industrial emissions in the Netherlands and Western Europe, and enable those synergies with Porthos and Athos. Aramis project intends to realize large-scale dense phase CO2 versus just gaseous phase from the Port of Rotterdam to the offshore KNL license blocks, where the majority of that field storage potential is located. Our planned startup there is around 2026, with all elements of the Aramis system scalable. And the intent there is, of course, that you can expand as you need it for future growth. All of that is kind of built within the subsidy system that the Netherlands has kind of brought forward, but it will help to facilitate that movement into a greener future as a part of the energy transition. I'll pause there and move to the next panelist.
Thank you very much, Lee. That was an excellent insight to what Shell is doing. So we're going to go to the next panelist now from the Port of Rotterdam, Bram Zomer.
Take it away, Thank you, Bram. Jeffrey. Yes, thank you. So, Bram Sommer, I work as a public affairs advisor for the Dutch CCS project Porthos. Maybe there will be some doublings in my presentation with what my, precedent panelists already have told you, so excuse me. I prepared 2 slides, one with an overview of the project and one to give you some insights in the collaboration between Porthos, the customers, and the Dutch government. So, next slide, please. So this image gives you an overview of the Porthos project. The project itself is situated in the harbor of Rotterdam, which is an ideal location for CCS. It's a relative small area with a vast amount of industry, which emits 15% of the national CO2 emissions per year. And close to the shore, you have the offshore potential storage fields. Porthos itself consists of an onshore backbone, which collects all the CO2 in the industry area, which goes to a compressor station, afterwards to the offshore pipeline of approximately 20 kilometers to the platform and the gas field P18. Of the whole infrastructure, at the moment, only the platform exists, and in the coming years, we're about to build the onshore and offshore pipeline. The project itself is led by, well, as you just heard, 3 state-owned companies, Gasunie, EBN, and the Port of Rotterdam. And at the moment, we have 4 potential customers. So Air Liquide, Air Products, Shell, and Exxon. The capex, so the investment cost for the project, is estimated at about 450 and 500 million euros. And the total capacity in the gas field of P18 is estimated at 37 megatons. The reason that we're going to store 2.5 million tons of CO2 annually is the Dutch SDE scheme, which, well, the coming panelist Joël will probably tell you more about, because the term for the subsidy scheme is 15 years. So the math is quite simple. We had 37 megatons divided by 15 years is 2.5 megatons per year. The financial investment decision, well, you heard it already, is in 2022, and we hope to be operational in 2024. Next slide, please. Well, with this slide, I hope to give you some insights in the public-private partnership for our project that's quite successful until now. And well, at first we were confronted with the next chicken and egg situation. We as Porthos, we were planning to build an infrastructure for transport and storage, but for that we needed customers. Our customers, well, they have capture installations or were planning to build it, but they needed a funding possibility to close the gap. And the public authorities, well, they were okay with giving funding, but they needed a project they could rely to. The key solution to the situation was the SDE++, a national subsidy scheme, first for renewable energies, but since 2020, so last year, also for CCS. And between us and the companies, so the potential customers, we tried a funnel approach in which we started with an expression of interest, and afterwards with the customers who signed the expression of interest, we chose for a joint development agreement. So it was an agreement without binding consequences, but to give all the parties enough confidence to take necessary steps to establish the project. So the FEED, the studies, etc. This resulted last year in the first application of our customers for the SDE with an amount granted of 2 billion euros for the project. And probably, well, somewhere in the next months, the signing of the final contracts for transport and storage. Next slide, please. If you have any questions about the project, I'll be glad to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bram. And I'm sure there will be some questions for this mega project when we get to the Q&A session. We're now going to go to the next panelist, Joëlla Rekker from the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Infrastructure for the Netherlands. And so I'll say, take it away, Joëlla.
All right, thank you very much. And good morning, everyone. Yes, my name is Joël. I work for the Dutch Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Policy. And I'm the CCS policy team lead there. So yeah, the easiest part of this is that I'm the last one, and I think a lot of it has already been told. But I will give you a short overview of the policy on CCS, and especially on the financial instruments or the financial policies we have. In short, we see CCS as a very important measure or instrument for industry in the Netherlands to decarbonize towards 2030 and also after. It's a very cost-effective mitigation measure, and it's also a measure that can be taken on the very short term. Besides that, the industry or the industrial clusters in the Netherlands are located near the shore. And as you have seen or been told just in the previous presentations, we have a lot of offshore storage potential, about 1.6 gigatons in the depleted gas field. So, and there is a large knowledge infrastructure on subsurface technologies and things like that. So that makes it very well located for CCS. So we focus on, with CCS, we focus on different aspects to get CCS off the ground. I think what's already been told is that we also have a CO2 levy for industry, started recently. That is a major push for industry to actually develop CO2 mitigation measures, of which CCS is one of their options. But we also have different policies to really convince them to take measures, and those policies are focused on de-risking of the projects. It's focusing on international cooperation, and it's focusing on increasing or further elaborating on the research and development. I think de-risking of the project is one of the most interesting also for you. What already Bram has told you is that the Porthos project is the first CCS project in the Netherlands, and that one is initiated by 3 state-owned companies. CCS was not in their regular portfolio of activities that they were allowed to do, but we saw this as an opportunity to give them the role in CCS. We saw it as an opportunity for them to really get CCS started in the Netherlands. This was at the time in 2017 that there was not a lot of policy yet. There was no financial instrument yet. There was not there was not a lot around in terms of de-risking all those projects. So the state-owned companies, they took on that role. They took over a piece of the market failure, to say, and they started to develop the projects. I think that's one of the major key drivers that CCS is really where it is right now. I think 2 of the other instruments we have is we provide subsidies, 50% of those costs for feasibility studies, but also for FEED studies of the of projects up to a few million euros per project. But we also, and that's been mentioned already, we also provide subsidy for the actual development of the CCS projects, and that's through the SDE instrument, which was initially or previous years focused on the production of renewable energy, but that has been changed to the reduction of CO2 and also for industry. So CCS was added to that instrument. It's working like a contract for difference. So companies get compensated for the extra cost that CCS costs on top of the price of an EU allowance, so the price of CO2 under the European Emission Trading Scheme. As Bram also mentioned, that contract for difference is for a period of 15 years. That the subsidy goes towards the industrial party, towards the emitter, that party who reduces its CO2. And the subsidy is for the operational costs during that 15 years, but also for the investment or the capital costs during that time for the capture plants. And it also includes a subsidy for the fee for transport and storage. So there's no direct subsidy to a transport and storage company or project, but that flows through the SDE subsidy towards the industrial emitter. The industrial emitter gets the subsidy at the end of the year based on the actual amount of CO2 that has been stored. So annually that will be reported to the competent authority, and annually that will be paid out to the subsidy receiver. So that's how it works for an individual company. In the SDE, we have kept the amount of, the amount of megatons of CCS that will be subsidized. That's kept on approximately 10 megatons in 2030 annually. And the reason for that is that during the negotiations in the climate accord that was reached in 2019, it was agreed that CCS played a role in decarbonization of the industry, but there was also a fear that CCS, because it is very cost efficient and because it is a technology that is already available, that it will hamper the development of different technologies. And CCS is seen as a bridging technology for the next decades. So the amount of subsidy is capped on 10 megatons, and there will also it's also kept in terms of time. So after 2035, there will be no new subsidies for CCS projects. So existing projects that already received a grant agreement, that will continue also after 2035. But after 2035, we will not issue new grants to new projects. And a third way in which the SDE is have managed towards the CCS project is that only sectors that do not have any cost-effective or timely alternatives for CCS will be allowed to apply for subsidy. So in that way, we have a very good financial instrument or very subsidy scheme for these projects. We see a lot of interest, and we have the Porthos project from last year in the SDE. Today, actually, the SDE round of this year started. So in a month or 6 weeks, we will know how much CCS projects has applied this time. But we expect several applications in this round. And then we'll know for how much of megatons they have applied for subsidy. So besides the Porthos projects, we also expect that further infrastructure offshore is needed for transportation and also for storage. And that's where the person from Shell already mentioned that the Aramis project is taking on. Besides the SDE, we also emphasize on the international cooperation between countries. We see it as a very major component in exchanging knowledge, experience of CCS projects that will increase the quality, decrease risks, decrease costs for projects in the Netherlands as well. I think the best example of that is through the ACT subsidy scheme, accelerating CCS technology, in which we work with European countries, but also with Alberta in Canada, India, and also with the United States. So we have a lot of projects under that scheme where we see different parties in the different countries working together on CCS technologies. I leave it for now for this. And if there are any questions, I think there is a Q&A session after this. Thanks.
thank you very much, Joella, for your comments. And indeed, we are going to move into the Q&A session now for the first panel. So I'm going to ask Ed, Lee, Bram, and Joella to please turn your cameras on. And I'd also like to compliment you all on keeping your presentations within the time limit. We're exactly on time. So you've set the standard for the second panel. No pressure there. But we have received a few questions, and but using the right of the moderator, I have one of my own first to kick things off, and that is in setting up, and this is for the entire panel, for setting up of the public-private partnership. What do you think are some of the lessons learned? You know, if you could go back and perhaps it could be done differently that Houston could learn from in moving forward with our own carbon capture, use, and storage plan. And so I'm asking from both government and industry perspective. So if anybody wants to jump in.
Well, maybe I can start, and maybe Bram can also elaborate on that. I think if you look at the from a government perspective towards the Portals project, which is very much in public-private partnership, I think, is that as Bram said, there was a chicken and egg problem, and I think the way we started to break through that is that we established a lot of trust between the parties. We established a lot of transparency and a lot of communication. So initially there was not a lot of formal decision making or formal working together, but there was a very intense collaboration between the different parties, just to get to know each other's position, to get to know each other's problems or interests or motivations. And I think that's one of the reasons why it has become a success.
I will just offer, and this is on any public-private partnership, as Joelle just said, it's really trying to find alignment early on common objectives and trying to understand the challenges that both parties have and come at it with an open mind to try to work towards a solution together. And this is complex, and there are a lot of different opinions around how to address climate change and the greenhouse gas challenge that we have collectively. And so it's really important that people work towards a common objective. Once we can align on those, then it's easier a bit to then work together to gain the community support and to really begin to find a path forward.
Any of the other panelists wish to
well,
chime
maybe
in on
I
this?
can add something.
Okay.
And then I think also what's important in the Netherlands is the already mentioned climate agreement by Joelle, because the policy laid the foundation of trust for the parties to continue with a project like Portals, because CCS, well, yeah, it's not publicly, or it wasn't publicly accepted as a solution in the Netherlands at first, but once it was a maintained policy with the needed funding, well, it became a real option. So I think that one was also a really important step in 2019, which was one of the foundations for where the Portals project stands now, today.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Bram. So we have a time for another question here, and this one was directed towards Ed, and I'm paraphrasing here, but the question is, what regulatory work is needed to reduce carbon capture storage risk exposure? Because you specifically brought that up in your presentation. And then as a secondary question to that, and what are, as you see it, what are the major risks?
Okay, thanks for asking the question. I'll highlight a few that we see as ExxonMobil that we think are really important ultimately to be in place, and they vary in their kind of status globally in different locations, but we need reasonable measurement, reporting, verification standards that are applied. We need more fit for purpose, especially in the US, probably CO2 injection well design standards, but those standards have to be clear for industry to understand how they need to comply. And with that comes the monitoring as well. In some cases, we need pore space ownership certainty, legal certainty, and to be able to do that. We need access to that capacity. In some cases, that's an issue today in the United States in federal waters. That's not clear currently. And we need a mechanism to de-risk the long-term liability of that storage. And by that, I mean that putting a certainty or reliability requirement on companies for very extended long periods of time is problematic. And so we have to work out a mechanism by which we can manage that risk with the government. And then finally, for this to become global, to go from a few million tons per annum of injection globally, it's about 25 to 40 right now, to literally billions of tons of injection, this has to become a commodity that moves around the globe. And so that requires understanding between governments on moving that CO2, storing CO2 from one country in another country's subsurface pore space, for example, and the infrastructure build out ultimately to be able to move the CO2. Those are a few that we focus on. The risks are really, right now it's cost uncertainty to some degree on the capture, and then some certainty longer term on how that the payout for those investments will play out, either through incentives. In the US, there's tax credits. There was a lot of mention there what's been done in the Netherlands to help provide that financial support. And then ultimately this question around product premiums and whether that could lead to this being seen more as a commodity effort rather than a waste disposal effort, which could be helpful.
And Ed, if I may tackle into your points, maybe stability, I think is a theme that you touched on there, and that stability from what the markets will look like over time is one that is crucial, and it isn't specific to a specific region in the world, right? Across the world, that stability is going to be one that is key. I think one point that's often people think of in risk is the operational risk, and I think it's also important to point out that CO2 has been injected for enhanced oil recovery for many decades, and from a safety point of view has a pristine safety record. And I think that's one that is also worth highlighting, is that the risks here are much more how do we get this off the ground and ensure we can take the steps we want to, rather than can we do it operationally. The technology is de-risked.
Totally agree with Lee on those points.
Okay, thank you very much, panelists. We're coming to the end of the Q&A for the first panel, and we're getting more and more questions in. Thank you very much. I'll just remind the participants that if we did not get to your question at this Q&A, we will get to it at the closing Q&A after the second panel. But again, we've got still more great content to come. I'd like to thank all of the panelists for keeping to their timeline. Thank you very much.
Jeffrey, do you want us to try to respond online onto the questions or no?
No, we're going to collect all of those. That's a good question.
Okay.
And we're collecting all of these questions.
Okay.
And we'll get to all that we can during the live program, but we will, and this is a good reminder for the participants as well, if we can't get to your question during any of the Q&A sessions, we will have a follow-up program afterwards where we send an email with the answers to your questions from the panelists for everybody. So again, this is about making those contacts, not just about a one-time data dump. It's getting the conversation started. So now, and keeping it to the time, we're right on time. I'd like to turn the moderation duties over to my colleague in Miami, Luc Nijman from the U.S. From the Dutch consulate in Miami.
Exactly. Thank you.
Yeah,
thank
take
you,
it away,
Jeffrey.
Luc.
It's an honor. And as you said, the first panel set the bar pretty high, but we have a phenomenal second panel lined up, where after setting the stage and going into the potential of CCS in the first panel, both in Texas and the Netherlands, we will now really go into the commercialization of it. What are business models that could work, incentives to promote entrepreneurship, what is the ecosystem that we should build to have these solutions thrive. As the first panelist, I'd like to give the floor to Ushma Kriplani. She is a senior science advisor at the US DOE. The floor is yours, Ushma.
Thank you, Luke. Can everyone hear me okay? Hello?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. So thank you to the organizers of the event. I'm very pleased to be here and to participate in the discussion with the stakeholders of the system of CCUS, and to be doing it through this partnership between the Greater Houston area and the Netherlands. As Luke mentioned, I'm Ushma Kriplani. I'm currently a senior science advisor to the Office of Technology Transitions at the Department of Energy. My brief at the department is to advance the commercial deployment of DOE-funded climate tech. And a large part of my portfolio covers the furtherance of CCUS technologies. And the lion's share of these are funded out of one office, the Department of Energy, the Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management, though there are, of course, targeted contributions from several other offices in DOE. Tell you just a little bit about myself, my background. I joined the DOE in this advisory role a couple of months ago. Before that, I spent about 6 years at Argonne National Lab. It's one of the Department of Energy labs in Chicago, where my brief was the technological maturation and commercialization of argon-developed technologies. I was the associate lab director, and I led the business unit that provided cross-business commercialization expertise across the lab for all of the S&T priorities. This included also, in no small measure, developing strategy for commercialization when you're looking at technologies that are emerging for markets and applications that are emerging. And into this category, one can put things like the advanced grid, but also things like quantum information systems and the circular economy. I'm also currently a board member at MHub, which is a rare accelerator in Chicagoland. It's for hard tech, with member companies across many verticals from biotech to advanced manufacturing. Before Argonne, I worked in a variety of technology startups, all in the hard tech space. And in fact, I started just after my PhD at Schlumberger, which is a local oilfield services company to you that was in product development. And then after my PhD, I transitioned to business development and later on to strategy development and technology, mostly in the startup environment. I have a PhD in physics from Caltech, and before that, a physics degree from the Indian Institute of Technology in Mumbai. So coming to the Department of Energy and this panel, in July of this year, the Office of Fossil Energy added a strong laser focus on carbon management, as that office, along with the rest of the Department of Energy and the federal government, are stepping up to address the effects of climate change and to enable the energy transition. So FE is now called FECM, and their portfolio prioritizes point source capture of carbon dioxide, reliable storage, carbon dioxide removal, as well as the last discussion brought up, the utilization of carbon dioxide into novel products. Low carbon supply chains in areas that we understand will be very hard to abate, such as cement, concrete, steel, others are also a big focus for FECM. And I mentioned also low carbon hydrogen, green and blue hydrogen, because I know that there's been a previous webinar on this topic with this group of people. So that is also a priority for FECM. Their R&D portfolio in this area is pretty broad and pretty deep. And following DOE's thought process in this office, they're funding R&D advancements, but they want to make sure that those R&D advancements develop further through various mechanisms. And a large part of these mechanisms fall under the general rubric of public-private partnerships, so they take different forms, to the Consul General's point earlier this morning. So the Department of Energy and the labs that the Department of Energy owns work with small businesses, large corporations across pretty much every vertical in the US. If you can think of a household US company or a multinational, the Department of Energy works with it. I'll give a couple of examples of the mechanisms we have for doing this in a minute. And then, of course, I'm happy to tag up with members of the audience who want to learn about specific ones later on. So there's a pretty robust set of funding across all of the DOE offices that is dedicated to de-risking technology. And this is done from the point of view of emerging application areas. And a lot of this funding is open for companies to apply for, though some of the funding is dedicated to labs who are then working with companies, with a private sector partner, to make sure that the work is directed at the needs of the private sector partner. An example that many companies utilize kind of as a gateway drug to the Department of Energy, if you like, is the Technology Commercialization Fund, or the TCF. And this is where a company partners with a lab to get the lab to help them demonstrate technical milestones for this technology that will then enable the company to raise investment in the private markets for the next stage, whether that's a pilot of some kind or deployment. So applied offices across the Department of Energy, and FECM is a prime example of this, also issue funding opportunity announcements that are targeted to specific priority areas that portfolio has. So in areas such as carbon capture and storage, there's tail gas capture, and we have a partnership with air products and chemicals, doing this from steam reforming of methane. Or we have another partnership with Archer Daniels Midland, where biofuels production is providing the carbon dioxide, which is then being captured. Just earlier this year, there was 6 fairly substantial prizes given out to industry partners for direct air capture. I know direct air capture is not, exactly in the bailiwick of CCUS, but it's within FECM's portfolio. It's getting a lot of interest from this administration, and it's probably a useful element in the portfolio as we move to a decarbonized 2035 and then 2050. I will say that one thing that FECM does do, perhaps with more intent than some other more basic science areas, is that these prizes or grants to industry partners are typically done both at the lower end of the TRL scale, which in DOE speak, it's technology readiness level. It just refers to the fact that the technology is not quite ready for commercialization and may need some technical de-risking. But then they also have awards to higher TRL, much closer to commercialization companies and technologies such as engineering design studies. So in this year alone, there was funding provided to utilization. On the utilization front, this year there was funding provided to utilization of carbon dioxide from biomass and from several other sources. On the DAC front, we've been all following the news recently with Climeworks and so on. There's a goal to try and develop to deploy direct air capture, where one can draw down about 100,000 tons per year, which, as you know, is significantly larger than what is commercially available right now in the few instances that it is. So there are many targeted funding mechanisms that prioritize pushing forward FECM's portfolio, but the other way in which they are targeted is that they are targeted at industry partners in addition to being targeted at the tech development area. So this is all to say that DOE doesn't just fund cutting edge R&D in the carbon management space. They're also very keen. It is also very keen in driving the advances in carbon management up the TRL chain and eventually to commercial deployment. I'll provide one more resource that the Department of Energy provides, and then I'll stop with that piece, and that is the Loan Programs Office. Many of you may have heard of it. LPO provides funding at a much larger scale than some of the examples I've mentioned. I think we all are completely familiar and somewhat tired of the idea that that innovative hard tech faces a very bumpy and a frequently unsuccessful ride as it starts from lab invention to deployment at scale, and that deployment too in a fashion that makes financial sense. So a lot of the focus of the smaller funding streams that I mentioned out of the DOE is a combination of tech de-risking plus business model exploration. LPO, in fact, was set up for a somewhat different goal. It was set up to help de-risk market adoption and to fill the kind of value of death that innovative technologies trying to create new markets will often face, especially in the absence of concomitant policy or regulatory frameworks that might drive it. So LPO provides early stage patient capital that private markets are not able to do, and this is when for markets that are still new. For carbon capture and storage specifically, LPO has a $2 billion pool that is looking for partners at the pilot and beyond stage. So I mentioned US companies a bunch, but in many hard to solve problems, and climate change is probably the hardest one any of us will ever come across, it's the international partnerships that are going to be key to advancing the de-risking, the demonstration, and eventually the deployment at scale of all of the technologies that we're going to need to combat climate change. An example from a couple of years ago is work the United States and the Netherlands have joined together to do with 12 other countries, in fact, called Accelerating CCS Technologies, or ACT. It's an international initiative, and the goal is to not just do innovative R&D on CCUS, but also to try and see if new business models can be deployed. Now, the reason we're all here, of course, is as the Consul General mentioned this morning, the bilateral agreement that the United States and the Netherlands have through the Department of Energy on this side and the Dutch Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate on the other, on the energy transition. That seems to be a very active discussion, and it seems to be growing. The first topic seems to have been hydrogen, where significant progress has been made, including a pilot project, I think, that came out of the GHP Rotterdam thing. So there are other topics in this, but Luke tells me I'm at the end of my time, so I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ushma, and I assure you there will be plenty more time during the Q&A. I look forward to hearing more about the incentives provided by DOE, and thanks for ending on a note of international collaboration, which is why we're here today. As the next speaker, can I invite Julianna Garizar? She is with Greentown Labs, the Houston incubator. She's the VP of Innovation and the head of the Houston office of Greentown. Floor is yours, Julianna.
Thank you, Luke. I'm really honored to be here, and I'm going to be sharing some slides. If I can, let me see. There you go. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit more about Greentown Labs. We are, if I can move the pages, that is, just a sec. Okay, so we are the largest climate tech incubator in North America. It's been 10 years we've been at it. We were founded in Boston, Massachusetts. 4 entrepreneurs outgrew their MIT labs and decided to move to a basement in South Boston, where pretty soon they ended up being 17 and having nowhere to expand. That's when our CEO, Emily Reichert, took over, and she brought them to Somerville, Massachusetts, where now we have a campus of 3 buildings, accounting to 100,000 square feet of what we call office space, but also 60% of it is prototyping labs. And we have a solely focused climate tech expertise. So in terms of numbers, this is what we have achieved in 10 years in Boston. We have incubated more than 400 companies with 1.6 billion in terms of economic impact and 7,800 jobs created. And what we're the most proud of is this 88% startup survival rate that is in general much higher than the average in the industry. As you see in the bottom, the member growth, we have doubled the membership of our startups every 2.5 years, and that's when we got a new building. So what we do is supporting climate tech startups, and you can see the logos of many out there. What we mean by climate tech is not only tackling the largest greenhouse gas emission sectors, but also resilience. And in terms of the biggest greenhouse emission sectors, as you can see there, you can have not only the electricity, but also agtech and water, energy efficient buildings, transportation, manufacturing. And in terms of resilience, you know, very, very important for Houston, the technologies and service that prepare communities and infrastructure for the climate change impacts. And of course, we have a very big focus on equity. You go to the next slide. So where we fit in this startup journey, in general, a company would come from a university, like many of our companies in Boston came from MIT. They go through a context that here in Houston could be the Rice Business Plan competition. They get some money, go through an acceleration program like Mass Challenge or Y Combinator. And that's when they get seed funds and they decide to come to Greentown Labs for incubator, where we help them not only for prototyping, for pilots, for small scale manufacturing, but also with funding. As Ushma mentioned, funding is critical for our companies. 80% of our companies at Greentown have a hardware component. So it's much more difficult for them to get to VC money, and we really help them. We have a network of over 400 investors that we connect them with for the Series A. And of course, we also connect them with a lot of grant money. In general, they stay an average of 2 years with us. They come with an average of 2 people and they leave with an average of 15. And they move to other places for commercial deployment. And in general, in Somerville, we saw that many of them moved to the building next to ours. So we have created quite a lot of density in Somerville, and we hope to do the same thing here in Houston. If you go to the next slide, you can see that we opened our 4th building, our first ever expansion on Earth Day, April 22nd, with the mayor, of course. The building will cater for more than 50 startups, 40,000 square feet. We have taken the old Fiesta grocery store in the Midtown area, where the innovation district is going to be very close to the Ion. And as you can see here, if you go to the next slide, we decided to come to Houston because we thought that's where we would have the biggest climate impact. Houston is the global energy capital, and we really believe that we can help them catalyze the energy transition at scale. We already had quite a few committed champions. A lot of the partners, the corporate partners we work with in Boston had a very strong presence in Houston. So they really wanted to have a Greentown in Houston. We felt that in Houston, there was not a climate tech specific convener, although there was a burgeoning startup ecosystem. So we really thought the timing was perfect. If you go to the next slide, you can see the founding and grand opening partners that made the opening of Greentown Labs in Houston happen. One of the things our board mentioned is that they really wanted to have a very diverse group of partners and not only the big oil majors, and I think we achieved that. And if you go to the next slide, you can see our advisory board is going to really lead the conversation on energy transition in Houston and hopefully globally. If you go to the next slide, you can see that after 4 months, almost 5 of being open, we already have 40 members of what we call our startups, and even some of them that are on the scale-up phase, like Cemvita Factory and CZG, and also some of our corporates decided also to office with us, like Baker Hughes or Texas Citizens Bank. So we are really convening this great ecosystem here in Houston. Next slide, please. So we've got a lot of press attention, not only locally here in Houston, but also globally with the Financial Times and The Economist. And in terms of carbon capture specifically, So although we are an incubator, we know that, having acceleration programs is crucial to us. So for our incubator, we accept companies on a rolling basis, but then for the kind of challenges we have, we decided to do corporate-led acceleration programs. So with some of the corporations we've been working for 10 years, they've decided to somehow outsource some of the innovation to us. So what we do is this challenges that we call launch programs, and that we put together with the big corporations. So we've done a few with on hydrogen and mobility with Toyota and Shell. So what we do is we put together an RFP. We go about a challenge that the corporations may want to solve. We go and do a global search. We select the companies with them, in general from 6 to 10. And then for 6 to 8 months, we work with them to try to get the startups to where the corporations need them to be. And success for these programs is not only about them getting funding, is also about them getting to pilots, to joint development agreements, commercialization agreements, joint ventures, to outright acquisitions. And the success rate for those acceleration programs, because they are corporate-led, is much higher than the average acceleration program, where you have a bunch of solutions looking desperately for problems. In our case, the problem has already been set for the corporations. One that we were most proud of is the Carbon to Value initiative that was launched on May 6th this year. This is done by a set of a consortium of great partners that compound the Carbon Leadership Council. And it's basically, we have corporations like NRG and many others that like WL Gore. And we also have carbon tech NGOs involved, and also local governments like NYSERDA and Fraunhofer. So after selecting 10 companies, and Semvida, who is presenting today, also a member of that acceleration program, was selected and represented Houston. We are actually doing 2 more years of that program, and we really believe that the Carbon Leadership Council is going to set the stage for what's to come in terms of carbon to value, which really is something very important and dear to Greentown Labs. So I'm going to stop there. And I'll let it out to Q&A. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Juliana. And I'm sure it inspired many of the entrepreneurs among our participants to reach out to you. You already mentioned Semvida as a participant in your Carbon to Value cohort. So it's an honor to now give the floor to Moji Karimi of Semvida Factory. Over to you.
Yes, thank you very much. We're honored to be a member of Greentown Labs, and really grateful for everything that they're doing for us, and also for the overall climate tech and the CCUS ecosystem and startups in Houston. So today, I feel kind of, the pressure that I have to advocate both for all the startups out there, all the entrepreneurs out there, and also to advocate for you. And by you, I mean the U in CCUS, which is the utilization part of the entire spectrum of technologies that are being deployed. As far as business models, as it was noted, there is a lot of work that's going on the policy side, on the logistics of carbon capture and carbon storage, and both of those elements are where basically the operators have to spend money to capture the CO2 and to store the CO2, whereas utilization is an opportunity to turn the CO2 into something else that is more useful, that is more valuable, and create a new revenue stream for companies so that they could also organically scale up and deploy the technologies, and also help lower the carbon footprint of their products that they're basically providing to their consumers. So today, I just wanted to share, some thoughts, some of the projects that we're working on, and hopefully that would spark some ideas in the audience as you all are considering, a lot of amazing work in progress. So there are 2 areas that I want to focus on. The first one is basically CO2 based chemicals. CO2 is a terrible feedstock. we all know that it's a very stable molecule, does not like to react with things. But there's ways that now, entrepreneurs, national labs, companies are working towards, enhancing our ability to use CO2 as a feedstock, either through chemical methods or through electrochemical methods, or like Semvita does through biological methods, mimicking photosynthesis in some cases, in other cases using non-photosynthetic type of microbes that could use CO2 as a feedstock and have the amount of energy use that makes the economics possible for converting CO2 to chemicals. When I say chemicals, of course, that includes also fuels, but for us as a company, we have a bigger focus on chemicals, especially precursors to polymers and plastics, because in that case, the CO2 is converted into something that is in some ways also a method of sequestration, as opposed to fuels where it's burn again, creates emissions again, right? And the utilization is really where it would get us to a true circular economy, where we have a waste stream, which is really cheap, in some cases even cost negative, that could be used as a feedstock, in some cases replacing the need actually for fossil fuels to be used as a feedstock for fuels and chemicals. What's happening in the chemical sector right now is that there is more and more interest around bio-based chemicals, using biomass, sugar, corn, different woody biomass sources as a feedstock to make chemicals. And that's kind of taken off because, from the public point of view, it's better than using fossil fuels, right? I think people have made it clear that they want less fossil fuels in chemicals that they use. But the problem is that you can't make chemicals from electrons. We can't electrify that. We still need the biomass. We still need the feedstock. And biomass, even though right now is kind of all the rage, but I think in the future, there's going to be more scrutiny also on using biomass as a feedstock, because it also has a footprint, agriculture, fertilizer use, transportation, and all of that. And it's a seasonal, it's related to, use of land and food versus feedstock. So my point is, flue gas and CO2 could be a feedstock of the future for production of chemicals. And it also allows for utilizing the infrastructure that we have today for using fossil fuels as a feedstock, as long as the flue gas is captured on the back end and utilized to make other useful chemicals. An example that I could give you to make this more tangible is a project that we're doing with Oxy for conversion of flue gas into bioethylene. And then they will use that to make a polymer that they're the #1 producer of in North America. That was the first category. The second category, which is actually my favorite, is subsurface CO2 utilization or subsurface carbon utilization. As it was noted, there is an established legacy in the oil and gas industry, at least for CO2 storage and sequestration, and also for CO2 enhanced oil recovery. It's not new, right? We understand it. That is what has enabled a lot of the projects that were mentioned, where there is really no technology risk at this point. It's more about deployment and a scale up. But in the first case, again, we're spending money to store CO2 in the subsurface. In some ways, if you think about it, it's also a waste of carbon. Then there is the EOR, which allows us to use the CO2 as a media, change the miscibility of the oil, produce more oil, enable kind of more production of oil, but also using CO2 as a feedstock, giving us a low carbon oil, which into the future, like you may have heard Vicky Hollop, CEO of Oxy, mentions the last barrel of oil that is produced is going to be carbon neutral, or it may actually be carbon negative. So it's a good application. But what's beyond that? What else can we do? When I talk about subsurface carbon utilization, the idea is to use CO2 as a feedstock in the subsurface and convert that to other chemicals in the subsurface. So think about building an underground chemical plant, because we already have the pathways to the pore space. We understand the porosity, permeability, pressure, temperature. And a lot of times we already have the favorable pressure and temperature to do reactions. And the reactions is done through microbial reactions. In some other places, like in Canada, you could also do chemical reactions for producing other chemicals, such as hydrogen. So that's another exciting area that is kind of now transitioning from the research phase to field trials. And I'm very excited about that because it paints a different future for energy transition where, oil and gas industry could add on to what we're doing already for carbon capture and storage and EOR, and have a new category for production of low carbon chemicals and fuels in the subsurface, which also has a cost advantage because we don't have to spend the money in the capex to build facilities on surface as much. So these are the two areas that I just wanted to kind of bring up to spark some ideas, thinking about CO2 utilization, both on surface and also in the subsurface. I'm going to stop here and I'm happy to answer any questions at the end.
Thank you so much, Moji, and I think you made a compelling case to put the U in CCUS. Thanks for that. If I could invite Julianna and Ushma to join you back on the Q&A, please turn your cameras on. And of course, all participants are welcome to submit their questions through the Q&A. We already had a couple come in. But I'll use the privilege of being a moderator, of asking the first question, which is about the challenges that some of the startups in the energy ecosystem face. What do you think are the most important ones? Is that access to finance, to talent, to customers, supportive ecosystem? How can we support those aspiring entrepreneurs, especially in Houston and in the Netherlands? Who may I give the floor for that?
I'll let Moji start first as the startup representative.
Well, we're one startup, Juliana, but you deal with a portfolio. But the only thing I would say is, if for us as startups, this is just so ingrained, the challenges and the pain on a daily basis with the rejections, and you have a vision, and a lot of times people just don't get it, or they think it's just crazy, this is too early, this is too late. And at the end of the day, if you believe in that and you have the first principles to support that this could actually be possible, you just keep going, So we don't think much at this point anymore. We've kind of become numb to challenges and difficulties. We just kind of keep going. And, also the other lesson that I've learned is that we can't convince everybody, right? So we try to just focus on the 5%, 2% of companies who are really thinking about what would they look like in 2050 and what should they do today. So not just next quarter, next year, because that's going to be difficult to support the type of innovation that it could be early right now, but it could be a total game changer in the course of next 5 to 10 years. To give you a really quick example, right now we're launching a program for subsurface production of biohydrogen, and this could be done and at a cost of $1 per kg of biohydrogen that's made in the subsurface using the leftover oil that we couldn't extract, right? So a lot of people think that's crazy, but so was hydraulic fracturing, so was a lot of everything that we did in oil and gas was kind of crazy in the early days, but we just kind of follow through and bring it to life. So that's it for me. Maybe Juliana, you could talk more about what you're seeing with the others.
Yeah, so I think, the challenges for climate tech companies are compounded because they not only have the normal challenges of any startup, but also they're doing things for the first time. And a lot of people are telling them that, of course, this cannot be done. And I think that's why having a community of like-minded entrepreneurs is crucial, because there's many of the challenges that maybe at least technically have never been tackled before. And at Greentown Labs, what you have is a community of a lot of technical experts, and we use a lot of the peer mentoring. We are really tackling the world's biggest problems, and it's always good to try to voice your concerns and what's keeping you at night to other entrepreneurs who might be a little further along. And I think Senvita is the perfect example for us. They've made a lot of great milestones that many companies at Greentown have not achieved, and having them as mentors is critical. For 10 years in Greentown Labs in Boston, we have entrepreneurs who have gone through 4 or 5 different companies. So, you know, you get this critical mass of like-minded individuals who, you know, start creating companies because they think they see the problems and they can solve them, and then they see the expertise that the Greentown community has to offer, and we really accelerate this path to market by putting together all these people who have done it before or know someone who can do it, and knows also, of course, not only the corporations that are going to use it, but the investors who can fund it, and the right people to make it happen.
Fantastic. Ashma, do you want to weigh in on that? What is
just a little bit, because those are both great answers. I would say that you know, everyone knows that climate tech is incredibly expensive to develop, both in terms of time and money, and just, you know, sometimes the physical resources. You need labs or serious facilities, and I think it would perhaps be. We know that the VC model doesn't work for technology in this space and at this time of its life. It would be really good to see perhaps some funds set up, and perhaps Houston is the place to do it, given that Greentown Labs is there. Set up dedicated funds that look at early stage technology and that are not, you know, perhaps looking at the exact same, you know, average 7-year exit cycle. There might be a way to make sure that they transition to some larger funding at the end of that time, to allow many more of these things to actually find their market. Then, of course, since, you know, you belong to the Netherlands consulate, Luke, and I would say that we talk on and off in this country, but I think perhaps you have this more nailed down in the EU. There are government procurement and nudges, ways to acquire brand new technology. And wherever that has been done, it has shown to really push that market forward. You know, Germany did it with LED lights, you know, 30 years ago, and that brought down the price from learning by doing of LED lights. Everybody knows the solar story. I think we need to do that kind of thing for climate tech, and we need to do it in all of the countries in the world.
Yeah, loud and clear. Let me take one question from the Q&A, which is directed to you, Juliana. If you also have international or foreign startups in your portfolio, and if you could mention some of the opportunities that you offer for potentially Dutch companies wanting to export clean tech to Houston.
Sure. Yes, we do. We have at least 10 international companies at Greentown. Many of them, I think most of them, coming from Europe. I believe we have 3 actually coming from the Netherlands, if not more. The way it started is, of course, through the connection with the Netherlands and the Dutch consulate. You know, these companies wanted to set up a presence in the US eventually, and we started with a virtual membership. And then when they felt ready and they had the right funds, but also the right network established, they pull the trigger and they establish a physical presence at Greentown. So we've been serving as a launch pad for many, or a soft landing pad for many European companies who really see the US market as an objective. And the fact that you can get into this community virtually before actually pulling the trigger and starting with a presence in the US, which can be daunting, has been key for many of them to decide to establish the presence in the US. We are working with a lot of trade commissions, including the Dutch consulate. We bring in many missions. Now one of the latest members of Greentown Houston is going to be a German company funded by a Houston investor group, and they want that German company to move to Greentown Houston. So it's happening, and we're really glad to be part of that process. And as I mentioned before, we do quite a lot of events with consulates. The Climate Tech Summit is one of the biggest ones. We already have the Canadian consulate on board for that one on November 4th. It's happening in both in Houston and the Boston locations simultaneously. And I would like to extend an invite to everybody, because it's going to be a hybrid mode with panels in both locations, but also streamed throughout the world.
Thanks a lot, Juliana. And I hope with the event today, we not only convinced a couple of participants to join that event, but also to make the leap to Houston. We are coming up on 10 o'clock in the morning in Houston, or 5 o'clock in the Netherlands. So I'm afraid we'll have to wrap up, but not before I thank our 3 great participants in this panel. It doesn't end here. We will take some of the questions that we were not able to answer during the session and make sure to follow up on that after the event. But this also is another milestone in the partnership between the Netherlands and Houston on energy. We mentioned the MOU that was signed last year between Rotterdam and Houston, the MOU between the Department of Energy and the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate. But that it's not just paper. We've also organized a number of very concrete activities, like the Energy 2.0 mission last year that was mentioned in the introduction. The event today, and we'll make sure to follow up with it with future energy events on CCS, but also on some of the other promising technologies. Maybe Jeffrey, back to you to send us on our way with some final remarks.
Thank you very much, Luke, and compliments on keeping your timetable tight, and giving us the opportunity to close on time and get everybody back to the other things that they need to do today. In closing, I would like to let everybody know that we will be sending out to all registrants and panelists, of course, a post-event report on what we talked about and the questions that were posed, and we'll also get to the questions that we could not get into, for example, in collaborations with universities in both regions, which I think is paramount to the overall success. You know, when you want to move new things forward, when you have business, government, and academia working in concert, you can truly make progress. So look out for that, as well as any announcements for any follow-up events that we're going to have between Houston and the Netherlands. Excellent partners as usual. Thank you once again to all of our panelists for your contributions. We heard from government, we heard from big business, we heard from Greentown Labs, who's facilitating these smaller companies coming in with the innovations. Lots of great connections, and I'd like to reiterate the excellent comments of the Consul General. We're here to make connections and to foster relationships and moving forward on the energy transition. So I think that's all for now. Look out for future events to come. So unless Luke, if you have any final comments, otherwise, as my co-moderator, then we're going to sign off now.
Let's do that. Thanks a lot, Jeffrey.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, participants. We will get you that post event report. Thank you and good day.